Hi guys, I hope that you're doing really well and practicing radical self-care. And I think what that means, at least from my perspective, is I hope that you're getting exercise, daily exercise. I hope you're eating healthy, nourishing foods. I hope you're drinking plenty of water and being very careful about any sort of potentially addictive substances. I hope that you're not drinking too much or smoking too much weed or doing too many drugs while you're trying to recover from this relationship. Well, I hope you're not doing that in general. Also, I think it's super important to get a trauma therapist. Some of the modalities that have really helped me are EMDR, TMS, cognitive behavioral therapy, and just a lot of trauma work. Because what you'll find often in these relationships, when you get out of the narcissistic relationship, is you realize, or if once you start doing this work, you realize that the narcissist was basically sort of a catalyst, and they didn't necessarily they did cause you pain, but what they did do with their behaviors typically is triggered your childhood pain, your childhood abandonment wound. And they did that by abandoning you, by, objectification, devaluation, discard, the lying, the cheating, the gaslighting, all the things that they did. But what they really did was trigger that abandonment wound, right? And, most people that have sort of haven't experienced childhood trauma, they have healthy boundaries, they have secure attachment, they would not be very susceptible to these narcissists because they are not as susceptible to love bombing. And the more you heal, the more work you do around healing your trauma, the less susceptible you will be to love bombing or to somebody who is in love with this fantasy idea of you, but they're not actually taking the time to get to know the real you. That's a red flag of at least somebody who's, very involved in fantasy, right? And I think once you get out of these relationships and you do a lot of work, you no longer are interested in this fantasy projection. You want real, you want authentic. You want somebody who's going to own their stuff, who knows what's wrong with them, who's working to heal themselves, whether that be, their codependence, their trauma, their addictions. You want somebody who's doing their work. But I would say in general, when we get out of these relationships, we're typically very shell-shocked. And a lot of times we have a lot of anger, right? Or a lot of rage. But if you really look at what's behind that anger, I think often our anger, even though we feel like it's at the narcissist or the manipulator, really a lot of times the anger is at ourselves. And I think, at least for me, the anger at myself was because when I looked at it, I realized that I was, giving 150% and I was ignoring the fact that the person in the relationship was not doing any emotional work. They weren't contributing to the relationship in terms of emotions and, and vulnerability and authenticity and honesty, and they weren't doing any of their own work. So here I was doing all this work, all this work, trying to fix myself, trying to become better, trying to go to therapy, trying to read the books, and this person was doing nothing or next to nothing. So once you start realizing that, you'll see probably where you did not have somebody who met you halfway. And quite often, if you're codependent or the codependent type, you're going to keep working anyway. You take one step forward, they stay where they're at, so you take 2 more steps forward. They stay where they're at, you take a few more steps forward, rather than you take a step forward, they take a step forward. You take a step forward, they take a step forward. You take a step forward, they take a step forward, right? People that are meeting you halfway and also doing their own work, not trying to get you to save them, make your love save them or fix them, and you are not expecting other people to save you or fix you. We're not taking hostages and we are not rescuing. We're doing our own self-care. And part of doing our own self-care, it means being honest with other people. And even if being honest with other people is I don't think we're a good fit, and, I don't think we're compatible or whatever, and letting people go, or being honest with them in that if there's people that are in your life that you feel like they're, could be friends, that you start discerning that they may have narcissistic qualities or they're toxic, you can distance yourself from them. Sometimes if it's family, you don't get to distance yourself completely. You just sort of establish a neutral sort of gray rock relationship. Or if it's colleagues, you can't always exit those relationships. Sometimes you need to have like a gray rock relationship where it's very non-emotional, no emotional content, very polite, like business partner or business, strangers, acquaintances. So yeah, I think a lot of times that anger that we have is because we are mad at ourselves when we look back and we're able to see that we did not set healthy boundaries. We would nag, we would lecture, but we wouldn't maintain our boundaries. Lecturing and nagging and even telling somebody what your boundaries is not maintaining boundaries. Maintaining boundaries is all about action. So, we've gone over this in a few of these different videos, but it's like, you need to clearly communicate what your boundary is. You need to have a clear consequence if the boundary is violated. And then you can even, a further sort of courtesy is you ask them to repeat back to you what the boundary is. So you make sure that they clearly understand what you're saying and what you're getting at, right? So they repeat it back to you, could you tell me what I just said or what you think I just said? And get really clear on what the boundary is, get really clear on what the consequence is. And if they violate the boundary, then you enforce the consequence. And I think with people that tend to grow up in families where they learned the fawn, remember fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn is codependence. Fawn is people pleasing, accommodating. It's really sort of dishonest because if you're saying yes when you really mean no, or you're pretending to be one way when you really feel another way, like that is dishonest. So if you're doing the fawn thing, then you got to step back from that and, start stating your clear boundaries. So, instead of fawning and when they violate your boundaries, you like let them back 5 more times, or you don't enforce the boundary, you make excuses, or you move your line, you move your boundary, like that's not holding your boundary. So, stating it clearly, having the person repeat back to you what they heard, having a very clear consequence for the boundary violation, making sure the person understands what that consequence is. And then if it is violated, then you enforce the consequence, you enforce the boundary. So boundaries are all about action. It's not about nagging somebody. It's not about saying over and over again, well, I told you this is what I need, or I told you that's what I expect. That is just like, that's sort of like stating your boundary, but you're not really, if you don't have any action and if you're not following through and if there is no consequence, with people that tend to be boundary violators, they are going to, just violate the heck out of those boundaries. And you'll find a lot of times with narcissists, like they are not going to respect your boundaries. They are not going to. And so unless you want to be in a situation where you're trying over and over and over again to set these boundaries and you're getting totally exhausted because they keep figuring out some Tai Chi around your boundary, then you might choose to exit that relationship. If you have a boundary of no physical violence and somebody is being physically violent with you and you state a consequence, but you don't follow through with it and they just keep being physically violent, then, not at all that's on you, but you need to exit that relationship. If there's violence, abuse of physical, verbal, emotional, psychological, or sexual abuse, and, sometimes it does take, they say sometimes it takes up to 7 attempts to get out of these relationships. It's like breaking an addiction. It's like breaking an addiction to nicotine, which I know from personal experience is very difficult, or breaking an addiction to alcohol, which again, I know from personal experience, very difficult. But they say sometimes it takes people 7 attempts to get out of these relationships. And, that is for sure why no contact is very important, because it's like breaking an addiction. So I'm almost at the 10 minutes and I don't want to go over. I hope you guys are doing really well and practicing really radical, wonderful self-care. Take care. Bye-bye.